Good morning, everyone. So today we are going to start with Jeopardy. So we need Joseph Justice. Do we have Joseph? There's Joseph. Carlos. Where's Carlos? There's Carlos. Ethan McKenzie. There you are. And John Minch. Where's John? Oh, there you are. Okay, you guys are all in separate spots of the screen. So let me pull up last week's quiz and I'll share my screen. Since you guys are in all different areas, I occasionally will need help deciphering who said what, because I can't watch you all at the same time. Okay. All right, here we go. Let me share the screen. Okay. All right, so if you guys just want to pop your mics on, as soon as you know the answer, just say it out. And here we go.
Isn't that where like prisoners kind of adapt to like the prison experience almost?
Yeah, I will accept that. Okay. This pen is dead. Okay. All right. One for Ethan. Here we go. Question 2. Anyone?
Prisoner education assistant.
Nope. Joseph, Carlos, John. Any guesses?
Isn't it like I'm not sure what it stands for, but isn't it like a data set that goes over like, I guess, victimization?
It does. What kind of victimization?
Sexual victimization.
Right. Where?
Rape.
Yeah.
Rape.
All right, Carlos has one of the letters. So let's put this all together.
Is it the prison rape? Is it an act? Is that what the A is? Is it an act?
A, what the E is really important. We need the E.
Is it the elimination act?
What? Who said that?
Carlos.
All right, let's hear it. Could you say it all together, Carlos?
The prison rape elimination.
There we go. Yes. Okay. Should thank John. He gave you a little heads up there. Okay.
Thanks, John.
All right. So if you on your quiz got like the P and the R, like if you got half the letters, I'll give you half credit. And as long as the E is a synonym for elimination, I'll give you full credit. You're not getting any credit if it's an antonym. Like I've had students write the Prison Rape Enhancement Act, which is the opposite of what we want. You're not going to get credit if you write that. Okay. So Prison Rape Elimination Act. Okay. Here we go.
The dog program.
Yes, that was Ethan, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, very good. I would have also accepted educational programs. If you wrote GED program, that's fine, or literacy or adult basic education, college program, any of those I'll accept. Vocational programs is fine. We also talked about cognitive behavioral programs. And if you have selected a policy brief topic that involves another prison-based rehabilitation program, I'll accept that as well. So for instance, I had a student want to do drug treatment programs or religious programs. All of those are fine. All right, here we go.
Like depression or mental illness.
Yep, I will accept that. Very good, Ethan. All right, here we go. 5th question.
I recommend implementing dog programs to decrease recidivism or increase recidivism.
Which one, Ethan?
Decrease.
There we go. We do not want to increase recidivism. That's very, very bad. That's the opposite of what we want. Okay, very good. Glad we fixed that. I will accept that as well. All right, Ethan is our winner. Joseph, Ethan, Carlos, and John, all 3 or 4 of you will get a 5 out of 5 on your quiz. So just a quick note about that. Apparently the default setting on the quizzes was to post immediately. So several of you have emailed me asking to review your answers. Basically what happened, so what happens is if you have to type in your answer, I have to check it. And what it was doing was automatically posting all the answers that you got minus the ones I had to check. So it was looking like you guys were getting lower grades. So I have changed that setting so where I have to post it myself, okay? All right, here we go. Do we have, oh, Ashley, you had a question about the policy brief, correct?
Yes, ma'am. I just wanted to talk to you after class about another research project that I was working on to see if I can roll it over.
Yeah, that's fine. We can chat after this.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right. So this week, what we are doing is going over the last lecture that you will need for, hold on, I think I got to reshare. The last lecture before our midterm. So next week, what we're going to be doing, we will not have any Zoom lectures. You will just be scheduling one-on-one meetings with me to work on your policy brief. I'm going to do my best to fit you guys all in next week. It's unlikely that's going to be the case. So some of you may have to move to next week. I can also do some meetings over the weekend as well, but we'll make it work. Okay. So I try to meet with everybody before 3 because that's usually when I go pick the baby up. But occasionally we might have to have a meeting with the baby on my lap. And if that gets interrupted because he has a meltdown, we'll just reschedule. So we're going to make it work. Okay. So I'm not going to track you guys down though. You're going to have to reach out to me and we will schedule, each meeting is about 30 minutes. And if you need additional meeting, usually I'll set the meetings up like back to back to back to back. So if we're not done with our 30 minutes, we'll just schedule another meeting. Okay. All right. So this week, what we are talking about is the effects of prison. So it's kind of a 2-part lecture, sort of like last week. This is our big sort of stint with incarceration specifically. So the first half of the lecture, which we're going to cover today, are the collateral effects of incarceration. So these are things how we're talking about how prison affects the person once they're released, as well as people outside that are sort of touched by this incarceration, including the community and things like that. And then the second half of the lecture, we are going to talk about prisoner reentry. So what it's like and the challenges these people experience when they are released from prison and trying to come back into the community. So we're kind of at a crossing point in American crime and punishment. Rates of imprisonment are increasing, even though we've slightly seen a bit of a plateau and a slight decrease. The overall trend has been a massive increase in incarceration. But at the same time, we are seeing the crime rates dropping, right? So some people argue that this is exactly as it should be, and that increased investments that we've made in mass incarceration are being repaid with the benefits of reduced crime. But if we're going to use that logic, then the benefits of incarceration are a lot less certain and much slower in arriving than we expected. And the problem with that is that few people are understanding the full extent of the costs. So we are not properly counting the full extent of the cost that incarceration has on an individual, on their family, and on the community as a whole. So I have done a cost benefit analysis before, and I can tell you the standard way to do a cost benefit analysis is you figure out the individual cost of each crime in terms of dollars. So like I was talking about last week, like vandalism, like each charge is like $1,000 for the community. Every time there's a drug violation for probation or parole, that's usually another 1,000. Each murder is about 9 million. That has to do with the cost, the additional costs that go into a death penalty trial, especially if we're in a death penalty state. All of the appeals, all of this stuff, anytime they sue. So when you do a cost benefit analysis, most people are just looking at how much this is costing in terms of dollars and cents. But the problem with that is that we are forgetting all of these other costs as well. So when we take into account the collateral costs and consequences, we forget about the effects on the family. We forget about the effects of the community as well as other social institutions. So let's go through some of the costs that are not generally included in a traditional cost benefit analysis. So the first one is individual level. So the loss of social capital. So this is when a person is released from prison, they lose a lot of social capital. So social capital refers to the capacity of a person to call on personal ties to advance some sort of personal interest. So when you guys graduate and you are ready to apply for a job, you're going to have references and letters of recommendation, which you guys are, and those are examples of social capital, right? Calling on personal ties. It's very easy for you guys to get references and letters of rec. Writing letters of recommendation is part of my job description. So you simply have to ask professors that you have a good rapport with to write you a letter of rec or to write you down as a reference. If you've had internships, those are other areas that you can call upon, these personal ties, right? Or if you have family friends or people you've met through networking through college. So when you're ready to get a job and you can call on these people to recommend you for jobs. Those are all examples of social capital, right? And it goes beyond this. It's access to healthcare. It's access to all other sorts of things. So people coming out of prison are in a particularly bad spot to have access to social capital. So they're not trusted by many of those around them. So people don't want to be a reference or write a letter of recommendation for somebody that's come out of prison because they're worried that they're going to look bad if this person does badly in this job, right? So they're not trusted by many people around them, and the types of people that they know to call upon to advance personal ties are not really somebody that is in a pro-social position to help move them towards a pro-social life. So another cost that people don't consider when we're thinking about the cost of incarceration are the stability of the communities that these people are coming from. So it's common knowledge among criminal justice statisticians that within each state, the large majority of people being released from prison are sent to just several communities. So for instance, 80% of inmates in one large New York institution come from and are returned to just 7 communities within New York City. So this is pretty common knowledge. So the majority of people going to prison and coming home from prison are concentrated in just several communities. So imprisonment affects these communities, not only because so many of their young men are being sent to prison, but when they are released, they are coming home to this community. And these communities are overwhelmed by incoming men with all kinds of prison baggage, right? So imprisonment can really damage the communities in which these people live. People also don't take into account the families that suffer from the people when they are sent to prison. So the families suffer both emotional and financial losses due to the imprisonment of a parent or a family member. And we're going to spend 2 slides specifically talking about the effect of incarceration on the families. So just kind of put a pin in that. The other social institutions are hurt as well. So here in South Carolina, we spend about $7 million every year just on incarceration. That is the budget for incarceration. That's $7 million that we can't spend on other sort of social programs. They can't use that money for education. They can't use that money to clean up disadvantaged communities. They can't use that money for all sorts of other things that they would normally be able to put that money towards if that large amount of the budget of the state yearly budget is going towards incarceration. So these are all kinds of things that go into the cost column that most people don't include, myself included, when doing a cost benefit analysis. All right, so let's talk about invisible punishment. So this has to do sort of with the individual. So when this person is released, these are sort of challenges that they experience that have nothing to do with punishment, right? So this person has served their term of incarceration. They come home. This is additional punishment that they face simply because they were incarcerated before. So invisible punishment is a punishment that continues after an inmate has been released. And the new forms of invisible punishment that have emerged in the latter part of the 20th century are particularly disturbing because they exacerbate the division between us as law-abiding citizens and them as lawbreakers. So those that are convicted of a felony typically confront restrictions on employment, access to public social benefits, the ability to live in public housing services, and they also are a lot of times ineligible for public benefits or educational benefits. We're going to go through these more extensively. And depending on the state of residence, you can also lose your parental rights if you're convicted of a felon. So let's talk about restrictions on categories of employment. So I'm not saying it's hard to find a job because you have a prison record. That's not what I'm talking about at all. That's not a form of invisible punishment. That's simply a consequence of your actions, right? So you committed a crime, you were incarcerated, you got to know it's going to be harder to get a job when you're released. That is not invisible punishment. Invisible punishment is when each state, and they do this varies from state to state, but states will pass laws that say if you are convicted of a felon, you are ineligible to apply for these types of jobs. So usually they're things like jobs requiring contact with children, certain health service occupations, maybe security jobs, all of which kind of makes sense, right? But most states have gone beyond that and added these categories that just seem unnecessary. So for instance, in California, there's over 261 ineligible job titles for felons. In New York, these things include things like if you're a convicted felon, you cannot be a barbershop owner. You can't be a boxer or a wrestler. You cannot be a commercial feed distributor, nor can you be an EMT. In Florida, if you're a convicted felon, you cannot be an acupuncturist. You cannot be a speech language pathologist, nor can you be a cosmetologist. So that's what I mean when I say invisible punishment, right? That is punishment that is continuing beyond their term of incarceration, that is just making it more difficult for them to assimilate into society in a crime-free manner. So let's talk about criminal history being public record. So there are currently 23 states that have some form of public access or freedom of information statutes that allow felons' criminal history to be public record. So here in this, so that means that you can simply just Google a person's name and see their entire criminal record. In this state, you have to fill out a form, submit it to SLED, and I believe pay about $25. And they will send you, as long as you have this person's name and social security number, they will send you their entire criminal record. There's recently been a push to remove this from job applications. It's called ban the box. Basically what that means is they're trying to remove, if I'm sure you guys have applied for a job before, you have to check a box if you've been arrested or convicted of a crime before. That's what they mean. They're trying to get rid of that right there. Basically what they're saying is that if you've already served your term, why are we judging you based on that? You are out, you are free, you've done your time. We shouldn't be looking at that. There's been some interesting research that came out of this ban the box. Unfortunately, it is making employers a little bit more racist. So if the box isn't there, what they are doing is you are less likely to see somebody with a traditionally minority, like a name that sounds more like a minority. You are seeing that those people aren't getting calls back. So it's a really big mess right now. We're not really sure how to move forward from this, but that is one of the pushes, is to try to make it easier for these people to find jobs by not making criminal history so knowledgeable. So we also have to talk about some of your civil rights. So most states deny felons the right from serving on a jury. So then the question becomes, is it really a jury of your own peers, right? If you're being tried for a felony offense and we are removing everybody that's been convicted of a felony from the jury, that's not really a jury of your own peers. So most states deny felons the right from serving on a jury. A lot of states deny them the ability to hold public office or positions of trust, which usually means any form of government job. And in 31 states, convicted felons serving a probation sentence lose the right to vote. And in 7 states, if you have been convicted of a felony, you lose the right to vote for life. So losing the right to vote as a felon, it really depends on the state that you're in, whether you have to be completely done with your sentence, or if they're going to bar you for life, or if when you get released, you have to actually petition the court to get your rights back. So it varies state by state. But when we automatically take away the right to vote, and regardless of how we give it back to you, if we're taking that right away, this can have a larger impact than we know. It can often affect political elections by reshaping the electorate. So, for instance, nationally, an estimated 5.3 million Americans are currently barred from voting due to felony convictions. Where this becomes an issue is because felons are disproportionately drawn from the ranks of racial minorities and the poor. So that means our electorate is now skewed towards people that do not have, towards Caucasians and people that have a lot of money. So what we see is about 1.4 million African-American men, which is 13% of all African-American men, are not able to vote due to these laws. This is what we refer to as felon disenfranchisement. So in 5 out of the 7 states that bar felons from voting for life, oh, 1 second, Sam. That is a quarter of their entire state is not eligible to vote. Sam?
So what you just about how it disproportionately affects minorities and it starts messing with the electorate. Why does this exist? You just it sounds like I understand. Oh, this guy's got 3 charges for armed robbery. Let's take away his guns. Like that logically tracks. But was this more of a move on the politicians' part, saying, "Hey, let's get back in office because we can start screwing with who's voting for us and who is"? Or was it a political move that kind of initiated why this exists, or is there something more to it?
That's a really complex question. A lot of this stuff started on the Get Tough on Crime movement. Basically, their logic was that if you're going to be a criminal, then you don't get to participate in society like the rest of society. It's a shitty argument, really.
Well, yeah, it just sounded. It's the way you described how it's skewing with the electorate. It kind of just something like something a politician would write up in order to help their own chances of getting back in office is, I guess, what it kind of looks like.
It does look like that, and there have been a lot of criticisms for this particular reason, or that particular reason. It's hard to get a politician, like if you ask them that directly, they're really good at giving you no answer while they just talk a lot of words, but it's really hard to get a politician to admit that.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's just because I'm thinking about what could a felon vote for or vote against that would be so, evil or bad. It just seemed like something that kind of, like you said, disenfranchisement of their voting rights.
It's a way to disenfranchise the poor minority population that is unlikely to vote the way a politician would want them to. But getting them to admit that, it's like talking to a brick wall. So despite all, I mean, and another counter argument that they will make, and it's not a bad argument, is that voter turnout among felons is a lot lower than non-felons. So that's kind of what they point to, is that these people weren't going to vote anyways, which is a shitty argument. That's not a reason to take their right to vote away. So they're less likely to vote anyways. But there was a study done by the National Election. The National Election Study Analysis suggests that felon disenfranchisement played a decisive role in the 2000 US presidential election. And I'm certain that they can make the connections for every presidential election moving forward. Even if we look at small local elections, I mean, this definitely plays a role when we're looking at, these 5 out of 7 states. That's a quarter of their population that can't vote. Hampton, do you have a question?
Yes, ma'am. I was going to ask, can the felons just not just hop states and then vote in that one? Or is that not how it works?
Well, wait. Are you saying so? Okay, so let me see if I get this right. So say they can't vote in this state, you're suggesting they move to North Carolina where they could vote?
Yes, ma'am. Could they do that, or is that's not how it works?
Well, have you ever moved before, your entire family?
No, I haven't.
So Dr. Griffin, who used to be our department head, when he moved from Clemson here, it cost his family about $40,000 to move. So not only that, a lot of these people have family members nearby. If you have kids and you've got family that lives nearby that can take care of the kids for you, or you have a job, or if you are in a state that allows you to vote while you're still on probation or parole, you're not allowed to leave the state. So that's kind of like an ass backwards solution to this. And you're also assuming it's the state right next door to you that allows you to vote. So that's, unfortunately, like, I understand what you mean. Like, if they're so incensed by this, just move, but it's not really as simple as that. Moving is a pain in the ass. So most of you probably have just moved like your high school room to a college dorm, but when you're moving an entire household, whew, and you got kids, shit, that is not an easy thing to do. All right, other questions? These are great questions. All right, so let's talk about what it's like here in South Carolina. So in South Carolina, a convicted felon cannot vote until they are completely done, right? So if you are on parole, you're not eligible to vote until you're done with parole. And then you also have to basically reapply to get your voter registration. So if you were registered to vote before you were a convicted felon, when you're done, you got to redo the whole thing again. It's not just going to automatically populate because you're done. It's going to drop you from that list and you got to reapply. I actually just had to do that because 5 years after I was married, I finally changed my last name. But it's not, I didn't change it I didn't change it professionally. I just did it because my husband wanted me to do it and have our whole family have the same last name. But I had to, basically, you have to get online and do it. I have a PhD and it was really difficult to figure out. Like, they did not make it easy to figure out how to fix your voter registration just to change my name. Like, I went to several websites and I clicked on the form, and then the link that I clicked on, what it said was not the same name as the form. It was just, they don't make it as easy as they should. So you could understand, especially somebody that's been incarcerated for so long that the internet is something brand new for them. This is not easy for them. And then the other solution might be, well, just go down to, the city courthouse and go from there. Those people are only open from 8 to 5. They close during lunch. If this person is working, that's not really a solution for them. So it's just making it harder than it needs to be. So for a lot of people, they just kind of say, screw it. Like, what's the point? So here in South Carolina, you got to be completely done with your sentence before you're able to do that. Even if you're on probation, that doesn't count. You got to be done with probation. And unfortunately, a lot of people just assume that if you're a felon, you're not able to vote. So I've got 2 real world examples from that. There was a recent article, maybe last year or the year before, What's the bad Ravenel here? Thomas, I think. Is Thomas the bad one here? I forget. Whichever the bad Ravenel is, the one that's like, was like having an affair with his nanny. He's been incarcerated for several things. He's a felon. He was did an interview with a newspaper a couple of years ago and said something about not being able to vote. And they were like, whoa, like you are able to vote. Did you not realize that? He didn't even realize that. And when I was changing this lecture, when I was moving from Florida to South Carolina, I was doing research to, be able to speak to South Carolina laws. So I was researching what the laws were here. I came across an article from a guy who I used to go to college with. He was a friend of mine. We were in this giant intro to psych class together. He wound up being a drug dealer after college, went to jail for like 5 to 10 years. And there was an article that had interviewed him, and he also didn't know. He said, oh, well, I don't think I'm eligible to vote. And the reporter was like, well, you are, you just have to, do these things. He had no idea. Apparently, according to him, when he was released, you get like a huge, thick handbook from South Carolina Probation, Parole, and Pardon Services, and it was kind of buried within there. People don't even want to read 3 sentences. So, it was just something that he didn't realize. And I think that's a common problem across the nation, is that most people just assume if you have a felony, you can't vote, and they don't realize it differs from state to state. But even if you are in a state that gives you your rights back, it's not as simple as just like clicking one button, or it doesn't automatically populate when you're done with your sentence. So there are 2 states that allow felons to vote from prison with an absentee ballot. Who can guess which 2 super liberal states those are? What do we think?
California and Washington State.
Those are good guesses. That's exactly what the other class guessed.
New York.
Not New York. Where's Bernie Sanders from?
Vermont.
Massachusetts.
Vermont and Maine. In those 2 states, if you are in prison, you can request an absentee ballot and vote. So, like our nation, like all over the place. So all of these things we're talking about today, this invisible punishment, it varies hugely by state. So we even see more recent obstructions due to the war on drugs legislation. There's all kinds of legal barriers for people convicted of certain categories of drug offenses. So for instance, depending on the state that you're in, if you are convicted of 7 or 8 drug offenses, it's probably more than that. It's probably closer to like 20 or 30. You have to be within a certain category of drug offenses. You don't get access to public assistance, no food stamps. You can't live in public housing. You can't have a driver's license. You can't be a foster parent or adopt a child. Okay, maybe those are okay. But you also can't receive student loans. So these are what I mean by this is what invisible punishment is. It's you have already served your term of incarceration, and our state legislators have passed laws that have just made it harder for you to assimilate back into life crime-free. So depending on the state that you're in, there are some avenues for relief, but they vary widely. So for instance, in some states, if you're one of those people that doesn't have access to student loans because of war on drugs legislation, what you can do is apply to get that eligibility back. And after passing 2 unannounced drug tests, you can get the eligibility to receive student loans back. And some states allow you to petition the court to get things like serving on the right to serve on a jury or the right to vote. You can petition the court or have public housing or receive food stamps. So depending on the state, you can sometimes petition the court to get that back. But anytime you're petitioning the court or dealing with the court, there are court fees. Again, just making it harder for these people to get these rights back. So when we take away people's fundamental rights and make them feel less like a member of society, we're making it a lot easier for them to rationalize a life of crime. And we have to realize that our nation is in it has been in an era of mass incarceration for so long. Sooner or later, most of these people are coming back. 90% of people that are incarcerated are coming home. And if we have stuff like this on the law books, that 60% recidivism rate isn't going away anytime soon. All right, questions about invisible punishment before we start talking about the effect on the family? Okay, let's talk about the family. So we're going to talk about this in 2 slides. First, we're going to talk about the effect on the children. Then we're going to talk about what happens when a father is incarcerated. Then we're going to talk about what happens when a mother is incarcerated. So let's start with the families. So the incarceration of those who have family members really endangers them financially and emotionally. So let's talk about the kids. So the presence of parents in the US prison population is growing. Recent estimates show that more than 1.5 million children have a parent who's incarcerated in the US. Not only are there massive financial problems when a parent is incarcerated, but there are a lot of emotional problems as well for both the children, but also the mother that's left behind. But just speaking about the children, usually these emotional problems are manifested in educational failures. You'll see these kids' grades drop considerably. Sometimes they become very aggressive, or they become very depressed and withdrawn. And all of these things, these educational failures, aggression, depression, withdrawal, all of those are also symptoms of kids who have lost a parent due to death or a really nasty divorce. So we already know that people that live in disadvantaged communities are more likely to be sentenced to incarceration. So these kids already are highly likely to live in a disadvantaged community where they don't have access to some of the social programs that we have in nice neighborhoods. The children of incarcerated parents are at a higher risk for criminal involvement themselves. So they were already at a high risk because they're growing up in a disadvantaged community. When you send a parent to prison, this is referred to as the intergenerational transmission. If your parent is sent to prison, you are 60% more likely to join them yourself. Having an incarcerated parent is the best predictor of a child's future antisocial or delinquent behavior, convictions, and subsequent incarceration. Whenever I'm doing a study on juveniles and my outcome involves any sort of delinquency, if I don't have a variable for parental incarceration, that study is meaningless. It's not getting published anywhere. You absolutely have to have that variable because it is so predictive. So researchers have noted that this collateral effect on children. They've noted that by getting tough on crime, the US accidentally got tough on children. So it has to be acknowledged that undoubtedly sometimes the incarceration of a parent is a good thing for the family if that parent had a really bad influence on that family. But it can often be the final lethal blow in an already weakened family structure. All right, let's talk about what happens when a father is incarcerated. So research has shown that more than half of incarcerated men are parents to children under the age of 18. And this is an especially important issue because generally the males bear the majority of a family's financial burden. And in these cases, they're either bringing legal or illegal income into the household. Either way, a lot of times when this father is incarcerated, that family struggles immensely with finances. And furthermore, it's not uncommon to see a wife lose her job due to the stigma of being married to or living with somebody that was recently incarcerated. So if we're moving beyond the financial issues, and you could also make the argument that this means the mother sometimes has to pick up the slack and has to get involved in illegal activities to make up for the financial loss of her partner. But if we're going to move beyond the finances, let's talk about the emotional problems as well. So the imprisonment of a father, if they were residing with their family, which in a minute we'll see is pretty high. So if the father was residing with a family, that means the family status changes at least temporarily to a single parent household, right? So if we had two of the parents living together with their kids and the father is sent to prison, we are now a single parent household. That is the second biggest predictor of juvenile delinquency. So whenever you're running an analysis on juvenile delinquency, if you don't have a variable for single parent household or incarceration of a parent, that study doesn't mean anything. Those variables are so predictive that you literally can't run an analysis without them. The other concern is studies show that once a spouse is in prison, couples are more likely to divorce, meaning this temporary separation becomes permanent. So, like I said, fathers don't just contribute financially, they also contribute emotionally to the well-being of their entire family structure. Even when they aren't living in the home, these fathers contribute to childcare and social support for the resident parent. Let's talk about how many fathers are likely to be residing with their family. So there was a recent study done of 188 fathers in a maximum security prison in New York, and they reported that 74% of them lived with their child before they were incarcerated. Other studies show it's closer to 50%. So what we're seeing is anywhere between 50 and 75% of these fathers were living with their family when they were incarcerated. So with all this data, the most important question becomes whether or not these fathers were a positive influence on their children when they were involved in their life. And the research over the last several decades has shown that yes, with respect to mental health and problem behavior of the children, not even talking about finances, just emotional, that the father's presence was in fact positive. And you'll see this too, like if you ever watch documentaries or you've ever seen interviews with kids or even kids in foster care, they are fiercely loyal to their parents that are incarcerated. They don't want to have anything to do with the foster family. All they want is to be reunited with their parents. Even the parents that were drug addicts or were unable to care for them, all these kids want is to be with their family. All right, let's talk about the mothers. So about 2/3 of incarcerated women have children under the age of 18. This is becoming an increasingly important issue because more women are being incarcerated, or because greater numbers of women are being incarcerated. The female prison population is growing faster than the male prison population. We already talked about that last week. The reason this is an issue is because even though women only make up a small percentage of the incarcerated population, what that means is there are not as many female prisons as there are male prisons, which means that if the family wants to visit a mother, studies have shown that on average, they have to drive 160 miles further away to visit them. So our state only has 2 female prisons. One's in Columbia, I forget where the other one might be in Columbia too, I forget. But there's only 2 and there's like 15 to 20 male prisons. So whenever you're being sentenced to prison, if you're a mother, you are a female, you are most likely going to be much farther away from your family unless you happen to live very close to where that prison is. So because of this, studies indicate that at least half of children of imprisoned mothers have either not seen or not visited their mothers since incarceration. This low rate of contact is not good for anybody because strong family ties are linked to reduced recidivism. So if you've taken criminology, this is social bond theory we're talking about here. Strong pro-social attachments are a protective factor against recidivism. We're not even talking about how this affects the children or how it affects the mother's behavior while they're incarcerated. So let's talk about some of the differences between incarcerating a mother versus a father. Since mothers are more likely to be living with their children prior to incarceration than the fathers, when you incarcerate a mother, you put the children at greater risk. A recent study indicated that only a quarter of female inmates that had children reported that they were living with their father. So that means most women that are incarcerated that are mothers were living with their kids. So the incarceration of a mother usually means that it's more likely that the children are going to be removed from the home and either placed with relatives or put in foster care. And if you're put in foster care and you got siblings, chances are you guys are going to be split up. But when the father is incarcerated, the children usually just remain living where they were because they are more likely to be living with their mother anyways, or to be living with their mother and their father together. So when a father is incarcerated, the kids are way less likely to have to change their living accommodations. What we also see is that if you are a female parent versus a male parent, females are much more likely to lose their parental rights when they are incarcerated. This is a total double standard. A student in the other class asked why that is. I think it has a lot to do with the reverse chivalry hypothesis. So if you have ever taken any of Dr. Hefner's classes, she talks about this as well. So judges, when they are faced, if they have discretion and they are faced with incarcerating a mother, they either go one of two ways. One, they go the chivalrous way, and they're more likely to take pity on a woman because they don't want to split her and her kids up, or they are so incensed that a woman was involved in this crime or a mother was involved in a crime that they throw the book at her. And I think that's why we see that if you were a mother and you were incarcerated, you're much more likely to see the state move to take your kids away than if you were a father.
Dr. Hill, couldn't it just be that, like, not just, but couldn't a factor also be that, like you said, if a woman is the sole caregiver and she goes to prison, if the kids go to foster care or another family member, wouldn't they have to assume parental rights? Versus when a man goes to prison, if the mom retains parental rights, he doesn't necessarily need to lose his parental rights because his other half is still taking care of the kids. So couldn't that higher loss of parental rights be to the fact that the kids would have to go somewhere else and someone else would have to assume those rights?
You're correct, but it doesn't mean that the state has to move to take the rights away forever.
So she could retain her rights while someone else assumes parental rights at the same time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Oh.
just sort of transfer. Yeah. Yeah. So what we're saying then, if the state is moving to take the rights away, she's got to then actually petition the court to get the rights back. When the state moves to take the rights away, it's a really big deal. It's a long, drawn out process, and it's sometimes a lot easier to just leave it as it is. And that way she can be reunited more easily when once you go down that road, it's a long, long, arduous road. And then trying to undo what you've done is very difficult. You could also just transfer power of attorney. That would make it easier too. All right. So really quickly, I know we're out of time. The last one is super simple. It's what we mean here, a substitute parent, not a foster parent. So it's always better for the kids to live with a relative than it is to put them into foster care. But the problem is, if you're a foster parent, the state gives you a monthly paycheck. They do not do that if you're a relative. If you're not a foster parent, so if I took my brother's kids, I'm not getting a check from the state. So we see all kinds of financial burdens for these. So you want to do what's right with the kids, but a lot of time the family that you send them to suffers financially because they cannot afford the burden of these new kids. One study reported that 2/3 of caregivers of children of imprisoned mothers didn't have the financial support that they needed to meet the necessary expenses of the child. All right, questions about this? All right, so on Wednesday, what we're going to do is we're going to start talking about prisoner reentry. We're going to talk about two big problems for people coming back from prison. We're going to talk about housing issues and work issues. All right. If there's nothing else, I will see you all on Wednesday.
Dr. Hill?
Yes.
I had some really cool stuff happen this weekend.
What's that?